We have about 70% alignment right now with what we hear the House is working on. We never start with anything that's high in terms of alignment. So I'm very optimistic that we'll put politics aside and get to some solutions here that will really make a difference. I think the Justice Act is a starting point, as Senator Sass said. This may not be the end all, but this could be a start.
Well, that was Senator David Perdue of Georgia earlier this hour as Senate Republicans unveiled their police reform bill. It comes on the heels of President Trump's executive order yesterday. The president addressing ways to de-escalate police confrontations while also defending the police and restating his call for law and order. Let's go to the North Lawn now for our headliner this morning, Senior Counsel to the President, Kellyanne Conway. Kellyanne, good morning. Thanks so much for being here. A lot of breaking news this morning. We just heard from Senate Republicans unveiling their 100-plus page bill. Where does the president stand on a compromise as far as what we're seeing from both parties this morning?
Well, the president took the first step by issuing this executive order yesterday, meeting with families of lost loved ones, and then separately going to the Rose Garden and unveiling his own executive order. The president took it very quickly and as far as he can as the executive. We're very pleased and very heartened, Sandra, that the Congress is moving very quickly. A 100-page bill tells you how seriously and how earnestly people are working on this on Capitol Hill, and the president's made clear he will look at the legislation and sign into law something that meets this moment, that obviously does not defund the police, as some of the radical leftists are demanding, and two-thirds of America is against, and even Joe Biden says he's against. More on that in a moment. But also make sure that these communities that the law enforcement are supposed to be protecting feel protected. And that's why it's important that we bring everybody together. My colleague Jerron Smith here at the White House has made very clear in recent media appearances, including on your network, that in the previous administration, you only had one side of the equation. Something like 15 of the 18,000 police departments have been involved at all. So with the president going out there, talking about more funding, incentivizing different law enforcement offices, talking about no chokehold unless the officer himself or herself feels like their life is in jeopardy, he went really far afield. And I think that set the table in a very major way that the White House imprimatur is on this very important moment and this very important piece of legislation. Let's let those who make the laws, the Congress, act next.
How important is the timing of this for the president when you look at whether or not he will support some sort of compromise here, Kellyanne? How quickly is he pressing to move forward with something?
Well, as you know, Trump's speed is a breakneck one. The volume and velocity with which he has worked as president for 3.5 years for this country is truly breathtaking and unprecedented. So this will be no exception. In fact, I believe that we need to meet this moment for the nation. Certainly not just for Washington, D.C., but for the entire nation. And people are looking at this a very different way. And we're having a national conversation and conversations here at the White House about how best to meet that moment. There's a great concern, the president has expressed it, that you've got people saying get rid of the police. And the president made very clear yesterday that's a complete non-starter. We want all of our communities and neighborhoods to be able to rely upon the good cops, the law enforcement. And this president from day one, Sandra, has made good on his promise to both more generously resource and more deeply respect our law enforcement. At the same time, we got to get rid of the bad cops. We got to get rid of the people who are using excessive force. Have that conversation and put into legislation as appropriate, not just how to use force, but when to use force. Everybody saw the 8 minutes and 46 seconds of George Floyd's slow and senseless death. That can't happen again. And my colleague Jerron Smith was just telling me a few moments ago that you have many police forces across this country adopting the policy on chokeholds, but Minneapolis was not one of them. And you've got this guy, this murderous cop in Minneapolis. He's been protected by his union. I think it bears repeating again. He had over 17 or 18 complaints against him and is protected by the union. He should have been gone perhaps a long time ago. So you know,
Kellyanne, I want to get this in here because obviously
the good cops want the bad cops gone more than anybody.
Gotcha. And that's what we hear from the president. Chuck Schumer, as you can imagine, is pushing back hard on what he heard from the president the other day. Let's listen to this together.
While the president has finally acknowledged the need for policing reform, one modest, inadequate executive order will not make up for his decades of inflammatory rhetoric.
So he chose to get personal with that. Senator Tim Scott saying just a moment ago, Kellyanne, if we don't have the votes on the motion to proceed, that means politics has won out. I want to transition now to something else we're obviously watching with the continued pandemic in this country, coronavirus. Vice President Mike Pence has penned a piece published in the Wall Street Journal this morning. I'll read a portion of it. This isn't a coronavirus second wave, he writes, Kellyanne. He says, with testing, treatments, and vaccine trials ramping up, we are far better off than the media report. He's painting a very rosy picture of what we're seeing and saying that basically the American public is being misled as far as what we know about the spread of coronavirus and how bad it may be in this country. Is that perhaps too rosy of a picture, and is that in line with medical professionals advising the White House, Kellyanne? Well,
a few things. The vice president has done an incredible job as the leader of the coronavirus task force. I've been in those meetings routinely. He's done a great job with both the medical and financial crisis. The president put him in that role because the president knew how important that role would be. I don't think it's a rosy picture. It's this, that we're still in the first wave. So those who are irresponsibly, the non-medical professional critics are telling us we're in the second wave, we're about to have a second wave. We're still in the first wave, Sandra, and we want people to know that. That's why the CDC guidelines are important about social distancing and masks and hand sanitizer and the rest. At the same time, we need to reopen our country. And what this vice president is making clear, and Dr. Fauci said yesterday, we're still in a first wave. Until we get vaccines and therapeutics, we'll never be completely rid of it. At the same time, we've made incredible progress, and you don't hear about the progress report. We don't want people to be so afraid that they don't leave their homes, so afraid they don't reopen their small businesses, so afraid of the hypocritical just the hypocrisy that exists, that it's okay if you're protesting about something and you're shoulder to shoulder with no masks, and it's not okay if you happen to have go to a Trump rally, perhaps, or you happen to be dining at a small business in your community. So we shouldn't be COVID shaming people, as the president has said. But we have been vigilant on this. We have worked round the clock for the last 3.5 months on this issue, being led by the vice president. He's made very clear that the number of deaths are going down, the number of cases are going down, our ICU and ventilator capacity, surging supplies is way up. But this president has done any number of things that only a president can do, working with the other G7 leaders in a global pandemic, working across the aisle, signing into law trillions of dollars of act, engaging the private sector to ramp up and repurpose their manufacturing plants to help meet this moment. The hospital reimbursements, we're paying for all uninsured COVID expenses and testing. It's just been an incredible across the government, across America approach. And we're not going to allow the critics and naysayers to get in the way of this. Sandra, I really have to just say something. Since you mentioned Chuck Schumer and he politicized this, I'm sorry. He said Donald Trump has said things for decades. Excuse me. Let me quote Joe Biden. He said the following: I don't care why someone is a malefactor in society. I don't care why someone is antisocial. I don't care why they become a sociopath. Quote, we have an obligation to cordon them off from the rest of society, try to help them to try to change their behavior, but they are in jail. Go back. Everybody should go look at Joe Biden in the Senate floor as United States Senator in 1993, calling these people, quote, super predators on our streets who are beyond the pale and need to be locked up. His view of people in 1993, folks, this wasn't a teenager at Woodstock burning the flag or burning a bra. This was Joe Biden, a full-grown man in the United States Senate, calling people predators on the street who must be in jail. He has no credibility and no, honestly, no honesty on this.
Well, there are people on both sides of the aisle holding him accountable for his past comments and his track record.
This president did something yesterday that Vice President Biden never did. July of 2015, there's an article in my hand. It says that for President Obama, quote, police reform is a work in progress. You had 15 of the 18,000 police forces on board or engaged with at that time. I think what we showed yesterday, what Congress is showing now, Sandra, is that you get everybody involved, the community, the neighborhoods, the victims' families,
Senator Tim Scott just said in that
enforcement.
news conference, it was he said he believed it was the most presidential he had seen the president meeting with the victims and the victims' families of racial injustice. Final thoughts. Simon & Schuster's responding to this lawsuit from the Trump administration trying to stop John Bolton's memoir from being published. Why doesn't the White House want this published? Why doesn't the president want to see it published?
2 words, national security. So I sat next to Attorney General Bill Barr on Monday during a seniors event that we had here at the White House as he answered that question. It's the Department of Justice that's filed the lawsuit. And here's what the Attorney General said then, Sandra. He said, look, there is a review process that anyone who wants to take an action like this, including publish a book, must undergo. And it was the department's position that that review process had not been completed. I've not been part of that review process. The Attorney General also said, you know, it's pretty unusual to have a memoir like this while the people you're talking about are still in office and are still, your colleagues are still working in the administration. The name of the book is The Room Where It Happened. So Ambassador Bolton himself makes clear that he was in the Oval Office, he was in the Situation Room, he had a lot of access to the president and to foreign leaders. And so for me, it's not about quote protecting the president, as the critics and naysayers do from their, you know, the gargoyles on Twitter all the time. It's really about protecting the nation. And that's what I understand these review processes are. So I'll leave it to the Department of Justice to decide if that review process has been completely met. But I think it's not a big reach to ask people who have been in situations to access classified information, as someone like me does, to make sure that the review process is completed.
Got it. Just want to get this in here because the publisher of that book says that Bolton worked in full cooperation with the NSC and its pre-publication review to address its concerns. And Simon & Schuster fully supports its First Amendment right to tell the story of his time in the White House to the American public. I have to leave it there. Kellyanne Conway.
Sandra, a lot of these books aren't fact-checked, though. A lot of these books aren't fact-checked, I have to say. I saw a book recently that talks about a meeting that I had in 2016 at ABC News, and it has the wrong person in the room with us. It's a really lazy, unremarkable, top journalist book, but doesn't even have the right person there. So if we're not fact-checking the small things, we're not fact-checking the big things in many of these books. And I think that's a concern I have, not just about any Bolton book, but all the books that are out there. There seems to be no fact-checking. You can't say things on your broadcasts.
We're losing your words, Kellyanne, to the leaf blower or whatever it is coming behind you. Kellyanne Conway, come back soon. Thank you.